Hi, Jiten. Welcome. Thank
Hello.
you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being with me today. To be honest, I am so excited to ask my questions and have your opinion. But first, let me shortly introduce you. You're an author and award-winning diversity and inclusion strategist and practitioner. You work with individuals and corporate organizations in all sectors. You help them maximize the value of diversity through conscious inclusion strategies. And your book, Demystifying Diversity, was rated by People Management as an important contribution to the field. Big congratulations for that, really, from
Thank
the
you.
bottom of my heart. So if you're ready, I can jump into my first question, because my first question is very much linked to the title of your book, Demystifying Diversity.
Mhm.
So Jiten, I wonder how you see diversity is different than how others see diversity. What made you, or what makes you think that we need to demystify or deconstruct diversity?
Okay, so two questions there. One is, how do I see diversity? And the second one is, how do we demystify it? So let me go with the first question first. I see diversity as, I guess, as everybody. So there are no two individuals, even identical twins are not exactly the same. And therefore, for me, diversity is about recognizing and celebrating the difference that we each bring to the party.
Mhm.
And that can be in social situations, it can be in work situations, it can be even in a family situation with parents and children or other family members. If we look at our hand, we have four fingers and a thumb, but they're all different. And in many ways, but they're all connected. And in that way, I see diversity as being the fingers that connect the rest of us together.
Beautiful.
Now, I guess, do I think about diversity in a different way to others? I think the debate about diversity has been going on for so long now that people recognize that diversity is very much about recognizing difference. The issue is that there is a lot of fog around people's perception of how to value diversity.
Mm.
So this brings me into the second of your questions, which is about demystifying or deconstructing diversity. And in that respect, I would say that when we are faced with differences that are unfamiliar to us, we are likely to be feeling a sense of discomfort, and at the other end of that scale, fear. Okay. So at the lower end of the scale, it's discomfort. At the higher end of the scale, it's fear, because we seem to be thinking about, well, how do I work with this? Am I going to do the right thing? Am I going to say the right thing? Will I offend the other person? And what is it that I could do uh, that, maybe also, will they accept me for who I am? So there are many facets to this equation in that respect. And so with the book, one of the reasons for writing the book was very simply because I woke up out of a dream one morning, and in my dream I was holding a book, and the book was Demystifying Diversity. And in fact, if you hold the line just for a moment, I'm going to show you a copy of it. So here it is. Demystifying Diversity. And literally, I was holding a copy of this book in my dream. Um, and the cover decoration design is mine because I wanted it to speak to as many people as possible. So I'm going to put that down now, but it was really very interesting that I was almost intuitively inspired to think about bringing some of my understanding to the world in that way. It was like there is a need for this.
Mhm.
And the book is designed very much not as a high academic text, but as a book that anybody should be able to pick up and read and understand. So, particularly relevant to, say, line managers who often may not have time to read a book from cover to cover. So, if they read the first couple of chapters, after that, they can dip in and out of the book very easily, because we then cover things like, uh, you know, how do we deal with our customers? So, if a customer makes a racist comment, do we just let it pass, for example?
Mm.
Or do we challenge them? And what does that mean in terms of that client relationship? Well, ultimately, this is about, and if we think about large corporates particularly, it's about something that I reference as reputational risk.
Mhm.
Um, do we want clients who appear to be racist, discriminatory, sexist, homophobic, or do we want clients who are embracing people for who they are?
Mhm.
Uh, and of course, if we go with the second option, it means that we've got a much, much bigger target audience for our products and services.
Mhm. Mhm.
And therefore, now the question is, how do I then work with that diversity of clients? The best way is by having a diversity in my workforce that represents those customers. And in that way, I can start getting to understand different people and different ways of thinking, different ways of working, different ways of engaging.
Mhm. Mhm. That's the second step, Jiten. So, if you don't mind, I would like to move to my second question. So, the recognizing differences, this is how I say, is the first step.
Mm,
Then the second step is to create environments
mm,
where every single person feels included, not
yes.
excluding. Doesn't necessarily mean that we include people. So,
Mm.
what do you think? You work with organizations in different sectors. What needs to be done in order to create inclusive environments? I mean, I believe that being able to convey the sense of being included, it is not
Mm.
that easy. So,
No, it's not, because often uh, customers, I say customers, but let's talk about businesses and organizations. There's often a misunderstanding that just because we can bring a group of people who are different together, that solves the problem.
mhm,
Um, when actually that doesn't, because we may not have invested in creating a climate and an environment of inclusion first,
mhm,
or alongside that diversity. So, a simple example might be that somebody, and in fact, I put up a LinkedIn post about this just this morning, and I was talking about when I had hired a person who was registered blind.
mhm,
And I decided that before that person joined my team, I wanted to have a conversation with her. And in that conversation, the big question I put was, how can we, individually and as a team, help you to do your job and to be integrated within the team? So, part of creating inclusion is understanding that we need to be in a space of inquiry and curiosity.
mhm,
And when we do that, we're not making assumptions. So in this case that I posted this morning, uh, this person, and we're going to call her Liz for argument's sake, just to keep her anonymous.
mhm,
But Liz said, often, people come and they shout, uh, and they forget that I'm blind, I'm not deaf. Uh, and so it's like the other person is trying to overcompensate for that person's condition. So, so, it's perfectly okay to speak in a normal speaking voice. You don't need to do anything differently. But other things, very simple things, she said, if somebody comes to my desk and before they start talking to me, if they just say, "Hello, Liz, my name is so and so," I know who I'm speaking with, and after a while I will recognize their voice and they won't need to do that any longer.
Mm.
So we can see that this is not really rocket science. It's just that maybe we haven't thought about it before,
True.
because if we haven't encountered people in that way, then we would not necessarily be used to, each time we come up to somebody, to say, I'm so and so.
Mhm.
And that's one example. Another one was that if a blind person has a working dog, then to ensure that team members don't talk to the dog when the dog is working. And that usually means they have the harness on and the dog is guiding their owner.
Mhm.
So again, not very, it's not rocket science at all by any measure, but it's just about if people know, then they can put these things into practice. And it was lovely because Liz decided to send an email to all the team members saying, here are a few tips that will help me to help you.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful.
And in that way, suddenly people already start feeling a sense of understanding of that person, and and a sense of inclusion,
Mhm.
because now they're not sort of worrying, should I say this, should I not say this, should I behave in this way, should I not behave in this way? And so there's that conversation that I had right at the beginning allowed Liz to come in on her first day and not feel awkward.
Mhm.
And also the other team members didn't feel awkward because they could come up to her and say, hi, I'm John, da 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 da, or hello, I'm Mary, etc., etc. And it meant that she could start feeling that sense of being a part of a new team very, very quickly.
Mhm.
So that's a simple example of how we can start to create a sense of inclusion. And of course, it's also about, am I aware of my own language and behaviors?
Mhm.
So am I aware that perhaps something I may say could be interpreted as being offensive by others, even though I did not intend it to be that way? Um, And if that's the case, then, and if that other person calls me out about it, do I then get defensive and try and defend my position?
Mhm.
So if I'm trying to defend my position, often the sorts of comments I've heard is, oh, what's the matter? I was only joking. Can't you take a joke?
Mhm.
Suddenly, this idea that aggression is the best form of defense is totally inappropriate in an inclusive environment. Much easier to replace our judgment of that person. Why is that person judging me for what I said? And replace it with curiosity to say, I wonder why that person said that to me.
Mhm.
And that opens up a conversation. So say, I'm sorry, I didn't see it like that. Perhaps you could enlighten me a little bit. And in that way, we're encouraging conversation as opposed to creating a conflict where neither party can budge from their position.
Mhm.
Um, so then that person who was offended has an opportunity to say, well, when you say that, it actually reminds me of the fact that right through my schooling, people used to use phrases like that to other me and to isolate me from the rest of the classmates.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that gives an
Exactly.
example of how that can be
So,
used.
mm,
And that level of understanding then deepens, and it probably strengthens the relationship between those two individuals.
definitely.
Then if the other person became defensive and shut the conversation down, then of course that means that it doesn't help the team, it doesn't help the relationship between those two individuals, and potentially it may well have been an offensive term.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So very common ones, which most people know about, are things like the N word applied to Black people. Um, but in the playground, still, I can still hear children and teenagers using words like spaz, which is short form for spastic. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but in the UK, there's a charity It used to be known as the Spastic Society, and they spent £250,000 to change their name to Scope, the Society for Cerebral Palsy,
Mm.
because of the stigma attached to the terminology.
Mm.
So that shows, how much this sort of stuff is ingrained in society, and why we need to make a conscious effort to be more inclusive.
True. Jiten, do you see any progress in that regard? I mean, I would also like to ask you, what is the impact of COVID-19
Mhm.
on diversity and inclusion? You work with different sectors. You
Yes.
work with in different sectors. Do you see, do you notice different approaches, strategies according to sectors? Or, yeah, I would like
I
to.
think strategies have been quite similar, but there have been two broad strategies following COVID-19. One is, well, actually, there's two things here in 2020. One was COVID-19 and one was George Floyd. So I'll talk about COVID-19 first. With COVID-19, it was, we can say that the world undertook the largest ever global trial of remote working.
Mhm.
Remote working, agile working, flexible working were things that people like me, inclusion practitioners, have been talking to organizations about for at least the last 10 or 15 years, and probably even 20 years. And it's still seen as a little bit of a taboo thing until COVID-19. Now, people are so much more used to using online platforms, virtual conversations and meetings, that means that now people who do want to work more flexibly are going to find it much easier to request um, flexible working from their employers, and the employers are more likely to be willing to respond positively to that. And this has been a real big move forward in the COVID-19 environment. But equally, COVID-19 has shown that people with disabilities, people who are from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds, are much more susceptible to the virus and to death as a result of the virus than perhaps typically white people have been. And is that because their biological systems are already weaker than typical white people? A lot of it is around, I guess, that there have been systemic disadvantages for people, particularly in healthcare or in the way care services are provided to them, which means that maybe they've been more susceptible because they haven't had access to appropriate healthcare during the time before COVID-19, and therefore this was just like the hammer that falls on them, and it's that final crack that final blow that makes the stone crack. So the input of the weather and the environment and everything else has had a detrimental impact. It's made that shell brittle, and it just takes that one blow of the hammer through COVID-19 and it cracks. So we've seen that employers are now really thinking much more closely about what do we need to do to support individuals, what do we need to do to ensure that there is equity as opposed to just equality. What do I mean by that?
Please.
Often people say equality is about treating everybody the same. But treating everybody the same does not resolve the issues of disadvantage. Equity is about treating everybody fairly. And that means that in order for you to have the same opportunities as somebody else, I may have to treat you slightly differently. A simple example of this in a corporate environment is a lot of people who are in the boardroom are often from a very similar type of a background. And they may be from, the Ivy League universities or Oxbridge in the UK, that sort of institution. And therefore they have grown up understanding what the invisible rules are. Somebody different who may have gone to a lesser well-known university and who has had different life experiences would not necessarily have inculcated those invisible rules that the majority of the board members know about. And therefore, to create an environment of inclusion, one of the things I often recommend to executives is that they apply what I would call a buddy system. So one member of that executive or a couple can really start becoming a true friend to the new person, somebody that that person can go to and in confidence say, I didn't quite understand what that was all about. And they can have those conversations. So now they're being, if you like, onboarded in a way that is inclusive. And it's not just about policies and procedures. This is now the practical stuff that otherwise would not get spoken about.
Mm-hmm. So true. So true. Jiten, thank you so much. You know, I love talking to you. Every time I talk to you, I get inspired by your ideas and the solutions. But we have a limited time. So my last question to you is, if you were me, Oya, what last question would you ask Jiten Patel, who is the diversity and inclusion strategist and practitioner?
So I guess the question that I do get asked sometimes is, have we done diversity and inclusion? So we've done this, and this. Oh, we are now diverse and we are now inclusive. Yes, you are in this moment in time, but diversity and inclusion is a journey. It is never a destination. Because if we think about the diversity of people, that changes regularly, circumstances change. As we get older, we may develop disabilities, etc. It's a constant dynamic, and it means that leaders need to be constantly vigilant. And in doing so, that means that they're constantly ahead of the game. But often people think that because they've ticked the boxes, they've dealt with that, they can now deal with the business, forgetting that inclusion has to be an integral part of the business planning throughout.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful. Thank you for
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Bye.
Anytime at all. Lovely to talk to you.
Likewise. Bye.